Hey writers, it's Megan Barnhart. I'm live over on the Write with Megan Facebook page. And today I'm going to be talking about how to know what makes the cut when you're doing your first edit. And that could be a first edit of your novel, a short story, any work of fiction. It could also be a first edit of a chapter for a nonfiction book, a blog post, a sales page. So anything you're writing, once you get through that first draft, the question becomes, okay, how do I get to my second draft? What makes the cut? So that's what we'll be chatting about today. Hello, Cecilia. While people are joining, I'm going to get us shared in the Write with Megan Facebook group. All writers are invited to come join us there. It's a place to meet other writers and get some community. Writing can sometimes be a solitary business, and hanging out with other writers helps your momentum. I guarantee this. This is something I see with all the writers I know. When you spend time with other writers, writing seems like a much more normal thing to do. Sometimes people who aren't writers are like, that's so weird. You just sit in front of your computer and make stuff up. So come hang out with other writers. And just do a Facebook search for Write with Megan and you will find us. So this question comes from somebody in the Write with Megan Facebook group. Hi, Dave. Hi, Holly. Hi, Wayne. Good to see you all. And every week I ask just kind of like a reflection question. I'll say more on that in a minute, but I ask a reflection question like, what insights or questions came up as we were writing this week? And so somebody said, I'm kind of at the point of ready to make a second draft, and I'm working on editing, and this is always a question that comes up, what makes the cut? So I wanted to talk about it. Cecilia says it does make a difference hanging out with other writers. Yeah, helps keep your momentum going. You can find critique buddies and partners or accountability partners. Some people in the group have found beta readers or even advanced review copy readers for their novels. So definitely come check it out. All right, let me backtrack as to why I had that post, because I mentioned I have this weekly post about what are your questions that came up this week and what are your insights. As a writing coach, my primary hope for all the writers I work with, whether in one-on-one sessions or people who just come hang out in the free Write with Megan group, my number one hope for all of you is that you find your own writing process. Writing is this really mysterious thing, and if you figure out what works for you and track those things, then you'll be able to use them again and again. And so then you won't be fighting yourself as well as trying to wrangle your characters or your sentences, whatever you're writing. So asking these kinds of reflective questions is part of finding your process. And that question is exactly designed to bring up queries like this one, what makes the cut when I get into my second draft? So the reason I think this is a very important question is not because there's some magical list of things to take out or add in or keep in when you do a second draft, but because this is one of the primary primal questions that you as a writer need to be asking yourself all of the time. This is something that you need to be tracking in your writing. So just show of hands, anybody out there track your writing process? Do you use maybe a bullet journal or a regular journal? Do you take notes on your writing process and what's working? Give me an emoji or leave a comment. What, if anything, do you do to track what works for you when you write? I'm curious what that looks like. Okay, so go ahead and add in your thoughts on that. And let's talk what makes the cut when you're, okay, good. I'm starting to see there's always a little bit of a lag, but I'm seeing some happy faces and some sad faces. Maybe sad faces mean you don't have a process. If you don't have a process, here's the easiest way to start. Absolute easiest way to start. At the end of the week, just ask yourself 4 questions. And those are, what were my wins? And these are related to writing. What were my wins? What were my challenges? What's working? And I can't raise this finger. And what would I like to try Just ask those 4 questions, and you can type this in a Word doc. You can write this in a journal. I actually track that in my bullet journal. Those 4 questions, I do them at the end of each week. Sometimes I get to them on Friday. Sometimes it takes me till Saturday or Sunday. But this is a really great way to start tracking your writing process. If you're not already tracking, just start with those 4 questions. What were my wins? What were my challenges? What's working? And what would I like to try? And that will give you a great start. So when it comes time to begin editing and get into a second draft, you want to be following a plan. So the question of what makes the cut and what doesn't has everything to do with what you're trying to write. And this is a place where you need to check back with things like your mission statement. If you don't have a mission statement, or if you're like, what's a mission statement for a piece of writing? It's exactly what it sounds like. It's you writing down what your intention was for this piece. You know, I want to write a sales page of this many words that will get people really excited to purchase X product. And by the end of reading the sales page, they should feel so excited and hopeful that they can X, Y, and Z, and they'll want to buy the program. Okay. It's really simple and straightforward. For a novel, I want to write this type of novel for that audience of this length. And by the end, I hope people feel whatever. There's actually a whole mission statement recipe in Recipe for Outlining the book. So if you're working on a novel and you want some more details, go check that out. But just have some kind of statement of intention. All right. So now you've got that first draft and you've got that statement of intention. You've got that mission statement. Your job is to now compare the two. And this is the joy of editing and the terribleness of editing. It's completely subjective. Okay. So before you, it's completely subjective in the sense that you get to decide. You're the author. Ultimately, it's up to you. But it's not a free-for-all, and I hope that makes you feel somewhat better. You know, it's not random. It's not close your eyes and point. What makes the cut from your first draft to your second draft of any kind of writing you're doing is what aligns with your mission statement. Now, this question was specifically about going, you know, after you get the first draft done. And if you've read Recipe for Outlining, if you've read Recipe for Drafting, you know that I advise you to just get a really rough first draft in. And so by the time you end up with that first draft, it's going to have a lot of stuff in it that's really rough. And you're not going to be able to decide in one go at it everything that goes. So let me say that in a way that human beings can understand instead of just the voices in my head. Let go of the expectation that from the first draft to the second draft, you're going to cut everything that needs to be cut. Does that make sense? And let me know, does that feel good? How does that feel to know that from your first draft to your second draft, you're not going to cut everything that needs to get cut? For me, that feels so comforting. Like, oh, I don't have to try to catch it all in one. Hey, Diane, good to see you. Oh, cool. I'm seeing people have some processes they're using. Holly uses spreadsheet templates, and it looked like something from Scrivener as well. Somebody else said Scrivener. Wayne says he's got notebooks full. Awesome. And Holly, I'm interested to know, do your Scrivener and your spreadsheet templates help you track what's working for you in your writing? Yes, thank you. Cecilia shared those. The fourth question is, what would I like to try? So the 4 questions I recommend asking yourself: what was a win? What was a challenge? And you could do, you know, what were my challenges? What were my wins? However it feels more comfortable to you. Wins, challenges, what's working already? Like, ooh, I'm writing in the mornings and that's really working. And then what would I like to try? So what would I like to try might be you heard about a process somebody else uses, or you're thinking, gosh, you know, I keep getting really tired when I try to do my writing in the evening. I'm going to try moving my writing to the morning. Doesn't have to be fancy, just something that you want to add in. And by the way, you might not always have a something you want to try. If you have something that's working, just keep working it, right? The something I want to try, you may not have. Jessica says, I create templates for character bios, scene descriptions, supporting character lists. I also have a scene timeline template I use to create an order of events. I limit each point on the timeline from 1 to 3 sentences listing main characters involved, purpose of the scene, and key event. Awesome. Jessica, does that work for you? Does that keep you on track? Hi, Anne. Good to see you. So, and Holly says, I listen to the voices in my head. It guarantees an intelligent conversation. Nice. All right. So I want to come back to that point Jessica's making, and that will be kind of like the second layer to this conversation. There are a lot of layers. All right. So the first layer was you have to know what your intention is. You have to check back with your mission statement. Then the second layer is what kind of planning information do you have? So Jessica talked about having her character bios and her scene descriptions. So that's reference material that you can now compare your draft to. So for example, let's say in my character bio for my main character, I have mapped out some of her strengths and some of her flaws. And when I was planning that character, I was really clear on those and I really like them. Okay, so now when I go through and read my first draft, one of the things I'll be reading for, and that is very key, one of the things, and I'll talk about that towards the end. But one of the things I'll be reading for is, hey, am I putting into action that plan that I made in the character bio? In this scene, or in each scene I read, is my character actually having those strengths and actually having those flaws? And am I painting the picture of her in the actual text that I said I wanted to create in the plan? Now that's one way it could go. You compare the plan and you compare the actual and you change the actual to meet the plan. But sometimes it happens where you go, oh, I like the actual, and you know what, this makes me want to change my plan. And you go back and you're like, no, actually her greatest flaw is this and her greatest strength is that. That is absolutely fine. What you're doing is still you're like a conscious analytical process, right? You're going through your first draft and you're asking, is this in line with my intention? And we started with like your big overarching intention, and now we're looking at sub intentions. So a character sub intention, a world sub intention. How did you want your world to feel? So if that sounds like a lot to think about as you're reading through, you are right. Those of you who have heard me talk about revising know that I don't recommend you try to do all of your revising in one go. So it's nearly impossible. I mean, maybe if you're a supercomputer, you can do this, but it's nearly impossible to go through your draft and simultaneously look for all the things that need to get cut or moved or rewritten or added onto, right? Because there's your plot, there's your theme, there are your character arcs. There is all the level of description and sentence detail and dialogue and word choice, right? So again, if you've heard me talk about revising, you know I recommend you do it in stages. And the best image you can hold in mind is thinking of remodeling a house. And you don't expect in 1 month everything's going to get done. And you also do it in a specific hierarchical order. You don't paint and put up new wallpaper before you've actually built the walls, right? And before you do anything else, you make sure the foundation is sound. So if you're in a place where you want that specific hierarchy with like how to revise and what to look for at each stage, that's exactly what's in my recipe for revising your novel course, and I will post a link to that. So if you're ready to get into the nitty-gritty and the specifics. But the big picture there is that when you're asking what makes the cut from my first draft to my second, you're not going to be looking at all the things all at once. Even if you're working on shorter writing, like I gave the example of a sales page, or if you're working on a blog post, the very first thing you should look at is your structure. So really the answer to what makes the cut from your first draft to your second is the structural elements that are aligned with your overarching goal as represented by your intention. Maybe you have a mission statement, maybe you just know really clearly what it is in your head, totally fine. And then any other subcategories of structure. So for example, if you're writing a blog post, you want to make sure you're following a good structure where you have an introduction, you have your material, the core of what you're delivering broken up in like 300 word sections with headers, and then you want to have like a wrap up and a call to action at the end. There's a structure for it. There's an outline for it. So you're matching up what belongs based on that structure, what it's supposed to look like, and your big picture. Okay, so let me pause there. Talking a mile a minute. I know I've got some comments. What are your questions given that very general and vague answer to what makes the cut? Let me hear from you, because the answer I'm giving is, hey, it's subjective, it's specific to you, and what makes the cut from the first draft to the second draft is really only structural elements. You're not looking at details yet, and the way you know what makes the cut in those structural elements is what lines up with your big purpose, and then what lines up with the structure, the particular, dare I say it, outline you're working from. So let me see what some comments are. Summer says, making sure I keep a copy of all drafts helps a lot with cutting. Although I've already cut 3 whole chapters in my current draft and it never gets easier. Oh, Summer, I'd love to hear more about that and why you think that is. Excuse me, I also save every draft. For me, that is, it puts me into a state of thinking that it's okay to make big cuts. I rarely go back and reinstate an earlier draft, but if I have copied and pasted into a new document and I know I have my original safe and sound, I feel free to make those big cuts. I feel free to slash, burn, get rid of stuff that isn't working, knowing that it's all there, being saved for me. So I wonder if that's your experience or something else. This would also allow you to, go and, if you're feeling uncertain, go and compare and then see, oh yeah, this newer draft is definitely better. So Holly's saying, because I asked about, do you like your spreadsheet systems? So Holly's response is, they keep me organized. I use formats to complete projects. Not that it's good for much, but I can write a 50-page script in a few days based on the current format I'm using. That's huge. That's having a format and a container that works for you is amazing. And I can't explain why it is, but there are certain things that just open up my creativity. Writing in a Google Doc versus writing in Word, 100 times better for my creativity. Writing in 750words.com, amazing for my creativity. Don't know why. Just know it works. Jay says, I've started simply watching the plot unfold. It's crazy how the characters just do stuff and I write it as it happens. Okay, nice. So this is a really great place to bring up. What if you are a pantser? What if you really don't like outlines? Or what if it's not your process to outline before you draft? That is just fine. But here's what's going to make you successful in editing. Once you've gotten out that first draft, reverse outline it. Just write down on a sticky note or on a piece of paper or, with crayon, just write down the structural outline, what happens, and, mark things like, okay, this is the inciting incident that's bringing on the conflict. If you're writing fiction, and this is the climax. If you're writing a sales page, do a reverse outline where you're making note like, okay, this is where I'm listing the components and this is where I'm getting them excited, to make sure that you're hitting, right? Having that structure, even if you place it onto your draft once the draft is complete, is what allows you to pick and choose when you edit so that it's not just willy-nilly. And has anybody read Blink by Malcolm Gladwell? Malcolm Gladwell is one of my favorite storytellers. So Blink is a fascinating book. I highly recommend it. And it's kind of about how we know things that we don't know we know, right? And so we can make these snap judgments if we're an expert at something. Like if you have somebody who is a skilled interior decorator who comes and looks at a home, that person can immediately say, oh no, this is the wrong color, or that shouldn't be there, right? And the question is whether you can tell us why. So you as a writer might have that expert instinct that's like, oh, this has got to go. But if you train yourself to be able to say why, you're going to make it so much easier for yourself to edit continuing forward, because you're going to make your unconscious knowledge conscious. Does that make sense? You're going to take that expertise and bring it to the surface so that when you make cuts, you know why you're making cuts. Let me tell you, editing and revising even a short piece, a one-page piece of writing, is a mind game that you are playing with yourself. And if you know really clearly, like, oh, I cut this for this particular reason, you are so less likely to go back, rewrite that whole scene, go, oh no, I should have made it the other way around, and have that whole like mind game, losing the mind game, I should say. Okay, so that was a nice long tangent. I wonder if there's a world record for length of digression. I should enter for that. Okay. All right. It's cool. So I'm seeing a lot of people doing how they do their planning. Okay. Wayne says, for me, must add to world building and plot. Okay. Yeah. Summer's saying that is why it's helpful to have that new draft. Ooh. Okay. Jay is asking, write then edit or edit while writing. I struggle there a lot. Jay, I would say you're not alone. I think a lot of us do. The best advice I have for you, based on my own writing process and based on working with other writers, for, gosh, it'll be 13 years this September that I've been a writing coach, is not to edit while you write. And I know this can be a challenge. There are so many reasons why I advise against editing while you write. They're all in Recipe for Drafting if you want to go check out that book. But the biggest selling point, I guess, is you're going to end up doing a lot more work if you edit while you write. You're just going to end up doing a lot more work because there are things that you may decide to change once you get to the end, and then it's a lot faster to just make a universal change, to go like, oh, actually I wanted the brother to be a sister, you know, and then you just go make that universal change. You're also going to avoid the wallpaper problem, and going back to the house renovation. You're renovating this house and you don't like the wallpaper on one wall, so you seam it, you take the wallpaper off, you sand, you paint. If anybody's ever removed wallpaper, you know it's a pain in the rear. You get that wall looking great, then your architect is like, yeah, but if you want that open plan kitchen, this wall's getting knocked down. You're like, I spent all that time and effort. So if you can hold off, there are so many benefits if you can avoid editing while you write. And Jay, my best trick for being able to do that is to leave yourself notes. So as you're writing, you're like, oh, this is terrible, I don't like it, or no, this shouldn't be this way. Leave yourself a note. You can do this in line if you're working in Word, or if you're working in Google Docs. I don't know about Scrivener. Guys, does Scrivener have like a little annotation thing you can do? Does it have a, can you leave yourself notes in Scrivener? Somebody let me know who uses Scrivener. You can put it on a Post-it, you can keep a journal going, you know, chapter 3, make sure you change this. So if you know you've got those ideas saved and you can work on them in your editing process, I find it's a lot easier to just keep going. So Jay, I hope that is something that could work for you. Rebecca says, I'm the same way about saving every draft. I always blame anxiety. I do too. I'm a bit of a writing hoarder. If I save the amount of physical stuff as that I save in writing, I would be a good candidate for that show. Okay, Jessica saying, Scrivener has a nice feature where it takes a screenshot to save a copy of a previous version of that section. You can compare screenshots and roll back to a previous version if desired. Awesome. And that, I mean, you know, if you're writing in Google Docs, you can do the same thing. You can revert to an earlier, you can see if you use track changes in Word, you can see that as well. So, you know, don't sweat it. Oh, Rebecca says, I'm a pantser and I find reverse outlining during revisions so helpful, and the revision course helped you. Oh, good. I'm so glad, Rebecca. Yeah, it's not because you have to sit down and outline before you get to write. No, outlining is not a punishment you go through. It's just for you to know the structure. And you're like, okay, well, this is the chapter where I want to be ramping up the tension because we're heading into the climax. Oh, am I doing that? Then it's so much easier to answer, does this make the cut? Diane says, that's a lesson I learned. Do not edit while writing. I used Grammarly once. All the red lines and notes stalled the creative process. Going back to fix what was wrong had me losing the flow. Oh my gosh. Oh, I hate that feeling. Definitely you don't want anything that's like correcting you when you're in your creative flow. In Recipe for Drafting, I talk about the different parts of your writing brain. For me, creativity is that 5-year-old child that is just saying yes to everything and wants to explore the world and feel joyful. And the analytical part of your brain that's so helpful when you need to edit is the adult, the responsible adult. So just picture that 5-year-old like, let's go jump in on the puddles. And the adult's like, well, we could, but then our shoes would get dirty and then the house would get dirty, right? And if you come down on your 5-year-old's great creative ideas enough with your rational adult, eventually the 5-year-old just sits and sulks and is like, well, I'm fine. I'm just not going to do anything fun. So respect your inner 5-year-old. Let her play. Holly says, I edit while I write scripts. It's part of my process, but my process has a lot in common with juggling. Yeah. And Holly, thank you so much for saying that. This is, again, what works for me and what I've seen work with my clients, but I have not worked with every writer in the world. And what we started out talking about is how important it is for you to track your process. And so honor that, absolutely honor that. When you find things that are working for you, do them. Even if every other writer you meet is like, oh, that's weird, I don't do that. Don't doubt yourself. If you know it's working, keep at it. Awesome. Okay. So let me circle back around and try to just sum up. To what makes the cut is always going to be a question of what aligns with your plan. So even when you get down to the level of word choice and, shorter sentences here, longer sentences here, or do I want more dialogue or less dialogue? Even when you get down to those nitty-gritty choices, they're going to be about what lines up with your plan, your intention, what kind of piece you're writing, your voice, your audience. At a certain point, you'll be getting feedback from people who are early readers for you. How is it impacting them? And they're like, oh yeah, I thought that was kind of a low-key scene. You're like, no, that's the scene I wanted to be really intense and exciting. Okay. It's all about your intention at every level of revising. As to the question, what makes the cut when I go from my first draft to my second draft, it's what matches up with your intention specifically related to the structure. So for writing fiction, that's going to be things like your plot and your character arc and your theme. I actually lump those all together in the Recipe for Revising Your Novel course. It's really hard to separate them out, in my opinion, because they all impact one another. So that's the biggest piece you're starting with. Again, if you're writing a blog post, it's like, well, what are the different sections? If you're writing a sales page, it's what are the different sections? All of which means you need to have some kind of outline. And we talked about that outline can absolutely be something that you create after the fact, or maybe even that exists, like a blog post outline. I just have outlines that I use that, I've got them in my head now, but I've got recipes if you want something like that. You don't have to invent your own, and you just match it up with your writing and say, okay, am I doing what I need to in every section? So there's no short answer. That was my attempt at a short answer. And it is a huge part of the writing process. Don't discount editing, don't discount revising. I've been using those words kind of interchangeably. I have thoughts about the difference between them, but those are not really important. But don't think that drafting and writing and the creative part is what you're supposed to be doing, and the other stuff is like a nuisance or an annoyance or anything like that. Embrace the whole process, because having to do that editing and revising later means that you get to go through and have a really creative, channeled directly from the voices in your head kind of rough draft. Let your inner 5-year-old go free, be as misspelled and forgetting details and inaccurate as you want. And then your analytical adult will come and help you with those in the revising and editing process. And they're complementary, right? This is the whole view of what writing is. It's not just one or the other, and one is not better than the other. One might be more fun than the other for some of us, but one's not better. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody who shared your experience. And maybe we can keep that conversation going. What are what are the tools that you use to help you track your writing process? And if you have some favorite editing and revising tricks or strategies, or softwares that you're using that make it easier, and how you use those softwares, please do share. Your experience will inspire another writer who will take that and make it her own and go, oh, now I have a process for revising. Hooray. Okay, thank you so much for joining me, everybody. I will catch you next time. And in the meantime, as always, I wish you happy writing.